Welcome to the Future of Life Institute podcast. My name is Gus Ducker, and I'm here with Connor Leahy, who's the CEO of Conjecture. Connor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Glad to have you. You're the author of The Compendium, which is an introduction to AI risk from the ground up. Why did you write this?
So saying that I wrote it is very generous. It was very much a team project where I probably contributed, not the most. So it was a team project between me, Chris Gamel, Adam Shimi, Gabe Belfour, and Andrea Miotti. All contributed important parts. So it couldn't have been done without my co-authors. Just want to really stress that. So the reason we decided to write the Compendium, well, I think I was actually the person who decided to write it and then kind of roped everyone else in, was that, there's many arguments around, AI risk and many explanations and so on, but they're often scattered. They're often scattered kind of in like strange locations, like, fragmented across blog posts or like interviews and stuff like this. And they're often written by audiences and for audiences that are not your typical everyday person. They're often unnecessarily technical. They're often require a lot of like jargon or like buying into other assumptions or like philosophies or worldviews that are just kind of like not necessary. That's one reason. So the first reason why was just because to create something that's like the whole thing in one spot. Second reason was because it's actually aiming at a non-technical audience rather than a technical audience. And I would say the third reason is that there are actually some arguments which I think have not been made in this clarity elsewhere, in particular around the social and the political dynamics. Many of the people talking about AI, as I talk about the compendium, have conflicts of interest or reasons to not want to talk about certain conflicts of interest or political situations or conflicts for various reasons. One of the things that I have going for me is that I'm independent. My money doesn't really depend on anyone in particular. I can kind of say whatever I want and also call out anyone I want. And I try to make use of this privilege that I have. So there are many people and organizations that I believe had deserved critiques that had not been made, at least publicly, and not in this clear form for various reasons. So a part of that is I wanted to make these critiques and drive a wedge, like make clear that, look, there is an actual conflict here. Maybe it's a conflict that can be resolved. Conflict doesn't mean that we can't find a peaceful resolution, but we should be clear, there's an actual disagreement here. Like, I believe strongly that if there's a disagreement, you should have it. Like, it's okay to disagree about things. What you shouldn't do is pretend to not disagree.
Maybe you could give an example of what you're talking about here. What's something that you've pointed out that haven't been said before?
I mean, it's been said by someone somewhere, I'm sure. But a big thing is that there is a very common confusion that happens when I talk to, for example, policymakers in DC, where they meet like the effective altruist movement or like the AI safety movement, around like open philanthropy and these kinds of people. And they were often very confused by these people. They're kind of like the thing that kind of happens is they're like, these people come to DC and they say, oh, AI, huge risk, it's going to destroy everything, it's going to literally kill everybody. And then policymakers are like, wow, it seems pretty bad. So should we ban it? Like, oh, no, don't ban it. And that's very, very confusing. There's this weird thing where a lot of this, like, there's this group, which we could talk about, I think we're going to talk about a bit later, which just like formed this like alliance of various organizations and people who claim to be the AI safety movement or representing the AI safety or X-risk movement, or whatever, but fundamentally want to build AGI and are trying to build AGI. This is around groups such as Anthropic, Open Philanthropy, a lot of the effective altruist movement, previously FTX and stuff like this. And I think there are some people in this area, in this realm, who are like, do care about the risks and do want to stop AGI from causing massive risks and so on. But there are those who don't, or who think that as long as they're in control of AGI, it's okay, or like this is the best plan. And those people actually disagree, but they don't know that they disagree. So driving a wedge is making two people aware that they're actually not allies. They think they're allies, but they're not. And this is actually very, very important for coordination. Because if you try to coordinate with two people who are actually different factions and they don't know they're different factions, you can't coordinate. And this will always lead to confusion and misalignment and betrayal and so on. So I think it's very important that a conflict should be had. If you think building AGI is okay. Like Anthropic should just be allowed to build AGI or whatever. And then, okay, you should state that clearly. And then people who don't think that's okay should also state that clearly, and they should have the conflict. They should. And I disagree with this. Like, I am firmly, no, I don't think that Anthropic or any other private corporation should be building AGI, period.
At least not in the foreseeable future. I'm guessing you're not against AGI in a kind of blanket way that we should ever build it. Do you think we should never build AGI or superintelligence?
My true opinion is that I think I shouldn't get to choose. This is not a decision that I should be making. This is a decision that humanity or democracy should be making, not me. I think it's extremely presumptuous and kind of like morally wrong to want to or decide to make a choice like this for humanity. I don't know what the best future for humanity is. And maybe I would like X or Y more than Z, but then I should get to like vote on that and should have my human rights respected. But like if I really want to live in this world, but other people don't, I don't think I should have the right to enforce that upon them because I'm going to be the one who builds AGI first. I think that is like morally evil or like very close to it.
Yeah, all right. But Connor, what if others are racing to build AGI before you? And I'm saying that as kind of partly a joke, but this is an argument that's often made, right? We will build it first, and we will build it in a safe way. And if we don't do it, others will do it in an unsafe way.
Exactly. This is the main argument that these people make, and these are the exact people that are going to kill us. Like, it is important to understand that if you find yourself in this situation, you are the bad guy. Like, you are the person who is going to kill everyone. Like, let's be very, very clear here. That's not saying that you're acting irrationally. That's not what I'm saying. It might be the rational thing for you to do given your local incentives. But you must also understand that you are an agent of Moloch. That you are the entity that is, breaking everything. Like, you're the problem. There is this really funny image that I very like, which is a picture of Sisyphus pushing a boulder of thing. And the caption is, a lot of people think they're Sisyphus, but actually they're the fuck-ass boulder. And like, if you are one of the people who are like, I must race for AGI, or you're working with an organization that's like, I must race to AGI, you're the fuck-ass boulder. You're the thing that is creating X risk. And look, I take a very systemic view when it comes to morality. I think most bad things happen for systemic reasons, not because there's like one evil guy who is specifically evil and decides to be evil. I think this does happen, to be clear. Like, there are people who are like this, but it's like really quite a minority. Most bad things happen for systemic reasons. They happen because of power structures. They happen because orders or because market forces. Look, I'm German. I know how it is, right? Is like most Germans are and were fine people. Like, they weren't super evil, but bad systems lead to bad outcomes. So I take a very systemic view when I think about these things, and this is a systemic problem. There is a fundamental thing that every individual actor, who finds himself in this scenario is incentivized to do evil, which is to race to AGI, and they do. And if they didn't, they are no longer part of the race, and then whoever the least cares about this enters the race. So there's also selection pressure, where if you actually cared about AI risk so much that you want to not build AGI, well, then you wouldn't be at OpenAI or Anthropic. You would leave. You would not work there. So there's also a selection effect. It's kind of like with if the CEO of a big oil company came up to me and he was like, I don't really think climate change is a big problem. This isn't evidence to me. Like, I don't update based on this information. I'm just like, well, yeah, duh, you were selected to not care about this. Like, otherwise you wouldn't be the CEO of Oil Corp. Like, I don't care. Your opinion is invalid. And there's kind of a similar kind of selection effect that happens here as well. So there's this big thing where like, okay, you're in a race. So what the hell do you do? So the weak answer is, well, you just give in to your incentives. You do what's locally optimal for you and you don't do anything. And this is the convenient excuse that people tend to use. I don't quite buy it, and I'll talk about that in a second. The main thing you should do is stop, drop, and catch fire. You should be like, help, help, help. I'm in a race. Help, help, help. Like, you should go to the government. You should go to the UN. You should go to every newspaper that will listen to you. You should form a political party. You should be help, 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 help. We're in this terrible situation. I can't get out. We need to get out of this together. Help, 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 help. This is what you would do if you actually want to stop the race. If I was Dario Amadeo, whatever, I would not build AGI. I would go to the president and be like, help, 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 help. We have to stop these people from racing. Like, I can't stop unilaterally. We have to stop all these people from racing. Like, you should found a political party, you should build a coalition. You should get unions on board. You should get, start, international collaborations on this kind of stuff, right? Like, actual coordination, actual civics, actual politics. It's the same problem as like the nuclear arms race, right? Like, where it's the same situation, right? No one wins a nuclear war and no one wins an AGI race.
Some of the leaders of the AGI corporations have done something that is superficially similar to what you're talking about here, which is they've gone to the US government. They've talked about kind of some form of pseudo-nationalization or some form of government collaboration. The framing there is, though, we need to build these systems and we need to do it safely. But what's the difference between what they're doing and what you're suggesting?
And the difference is that the thing that they actually did is, for example, let me give a concrete example. I think it was Senator Blumenthal when he was talking to Sam Altman during these hearings. Sam Altman in 2015, I believe, wrote a blog post where he talked about how machine intelligence, superintelligence, poses the gravest risk to humanity's survival. Very unambiguous, extremely unambiguous what he meant by this. This is 1 year after Bostrom's book came out. It's a kind of direct response to this. It was extremely unambiguous what this meant. Senator Blumenthal quoted this exact line. He said, so you wrote this. And then he said, I assume by humanity's survival, you mean jobs. Did Sam Altman then correct him and be like, no, Senator? No. Sam Altman said, yes, of course, Senator. That's exactly what I meant. There is a deep thing here where people don't know their history, including me sometimes. God forbid, young tech guy not knowing his history has never, not a story as old as time. Young, ambitious guy who doesn't learn from history until he actually, sits down. What was happening right now is the exact same thing that happened with big tobacco or with big asbestos, or big oil, or any of these companies. It's the exact same playbook is being played right now, where there are companies that think there is power and there is money to be had with a technology that has some form of externality or unaccounted risk. And they want to delay and deceive and, just muddle any response to this. This is exactly what is happening right now. And all of the companies are doing this. They are being extremely strategic about what they say. I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. Like, sometimes they do say more than they're supposed to. I'm pretty sure, Dario probably is not allowed to speak publicly for various reasons, because every time he does, he says things that incriminate him. And, other people, other CEOs are better media trained in various ways and are very clever about how they phrase things or how they dilute things and so on. There is no way that a corporation wants to actually get regulated. That's just not how the world works, and that's not how any of these regulations are. They want self-regulation. They want voluntary commitments. They want, them to set the technical standards. And what they definitely want is they want holistic regulation. Like, have you considered the considerations? We should first consider. We don't want to act too hastily. No, of course not. All the evidence on lung cancer from smoking is not in yet. We should do more evaluations of lung cancer in smokers before we go to regulation. Let's start with some more evaluations, some more studies. Maybe we can create a committee. Can we have some like White House committees maybe that will evaluate the evidence, the controversy you see? This is the playbook, which is called Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt, or FUD. The way FUD works is you don't directly counter the arguments of the critique. You don't directly engage with them because, you'd have to be good faith to do that. And that is hard. And we'll just draw more attention to the people criticizing you. So instead, what you do is, if you benefit from the current status quo, if just continuing on the path you're currently on is beneficial to you, you just spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You just spread ink. You just confuse everybody. You create a bunch of nonsense data. You talk about controversy and we should take our time and we don't want to be hasty. You just stall for time. And this is what, to varying degrees, Like, sure, is one org maybe marginally better on some specific thing than some other org? Sure, maybe, whatever. Is Shell Oil maybe marginally better than Exxon? Sure, maybe, I don't know, right? But like fundamentally, what is happening is they're stalling for time.
I'll give you one point here where I think the analogy might break down. So if you want to sell tobacco or you want to sell oil and you don't want to have to deal with the externalities of what you're producing here or the health risks of what you're producing, what's motivating you is to earn money, right? And I think the AGI corporations are partly motivated by earning money, but there's also something above that, something kind of more ideological, something about bringing in, creating a beautiful world for mankind, basically. Do you buy that difference? How do you think that that kind of changes the incentives?
Exactly. So this is what we also talk about in the compendium. So we have a chapter on this where we categorized kind of 5 groups of people who are trying to build AGI for different reasons. It is very important to understand is that the race to AGI cannot be understood in purely economical terms. This is exactly correct, as you say. If we look at this, if we analyze this as like a hard-nosed Wall Street analyst, it doesn't actually make any sense. It does right now because there's a lot of hype, but before this, it didn't really make any sense. And there's a bunch of other things that don't make sense here. There is a very deep ideological, even religious aspect to this. So I split the actors into 5 groups. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between the groups. It's not a perfect split, but is useful for us to think of it this way. The first are the utopists. So these are people who think they can build utopia, as if they, which historically, as we know, is always a really great sign, when someone believes that. So they believe that they must build AGI because if they do it and they're the good guys, then they can use this to usher utopia in for humanity, and this will be great. So this is people, groups such as Anthropic, many people at OpenAI, your, Ilya Sutskever's and your Dario Amade's, your, effective altruists, like lots of people in this camp fall into like this group. The second group is big tech. So these are ruthless corporations that just want power. They're not sure if they buy the whole utopia thing or not. Some of them might, some of them might not. But fundamentally, they buy power. They understand the concept of power, and they understand that AI means power, and they want more of it. So these are the ones that are now driving most of the actual resources of the race. Originally, the race, quote unquote, was just some ideological utopists running small companies like DeepMind or OpenAI, but we have now phase changed to where all of these companies, these utopist companies, have been propped up by big tech. Anthropic by Amazon, DeepMind by Google, and OpenAI by Microsoft. So there is a strong symbiosis now where these have merged into one entity to a certain degree. But I think big tech, for the most part, is far less ideological and far more just power-driven, more practical, and also more dangerous for these reasons. The third group is the accelerationists. So there are some people, who are basically just libertarians. They think technology is a moral good thing. Like there's no way that technology can be bad, and therefore all technology must be good. It must be built, and anything that is against the building of new technology must be bad. And the fourth group is the zealots. So this is a relatively small proportion of people, but I think it's important to be aware that they do exist. These are people who think not just think that humanity will be replaced by AI, but that this is a good thing. So they want humanity to be replaced by AI, either because AI is like a superior species or because humanity is evil and deserves to die or whatever. There are some pretty prominent people in this camp you might not expect, like Larry Page, the founder of Google, who told Elon Musk when Elon Musk said, hey, he doesn't want AI to eradicate humans, Larry Page said he's being a speciesist, which is, again, that is such a crazy fact that actually happened in reality. If you saw this in a movie, you'd be like, that's goofy. That's not real. Like that didn't actually happen. But it did. It happened in real life. And there's, of course, other people in this camp as well, like, Rich Sutton, very famous AI scientist, Schmidhuber, another famous AI scientist, but it's a relatively small camp overall. Some schizophrenic people on Twitter, I guess. And then the fifth group is just opportunists. They come along whenever there's power and money to be had. Before this, they were on blockchain. Now they're here, and now they're along for the ride. So they don't really have any particular loyalty to AGI as a concept. They just want to make money and like gain power, which, yeah, fair enough. I get it. You know, hustle's a hustle.
So that's the landscape. Which group are you most afraid of? You mentioned the kind of combination of big tech and utopians. Is that's the main driving force behind AI progress?
This is the current main driver, correct. Before this, it was the utopists. Now big tech are taking over. I also think big tech is kind of eating the utopists, you know, classic Microsoft playbook of, you know, embrace, extinguish, which is what we're kind of seeing, where Microsoft is kind of in a slow motion divorce from OpenAI. They're trying to kick OpenAI out now that they have what they need.
That's interesting. I heard that OpenAI was trying to get out of their Microsoft deal by invoking their AGI achieved clause. I hadn't confirmed that. Do you know about that?
I've heard about this. Seems like a possible rumor. I don't know. I think it goes both ways. I think there's some power struggle there that we don't understand. Who knows? But this is a classic Microsoft strategy. Like, you know, all the way back in the 90s, I think it was one of their emails that included like an exact description of like the strategy where you would like embrace a competitor or a new technology, extend it, and then extinguish. And so I think this is the thing is that like Microsoft is very behind on AI, kind of got the OpenAI tech that they needed, that they wanted, and also have now hired Aqua hired a bunch of like talent and so on to build their own AI efforts and so on. So they're hoping to like probably break from this and continue to fast. Makes perfect sense. Honestly, you know, props to the, you know, executives, like some true House of Cards shit. Good job, guys. Like impressive.
Is there a chance that this ends up being a good thing? If maybe the big tech, the profit focused, maybe they don't want to take as much risk. Maybe they don't really believe that superintelligence is an actual achievable goal. And so you get a more kind of the idealists or the utopians get eaten up by more practical concerns and launching a useful kind of chatbot product.
Right. So this would be actually a good thing if it happened in this regards. Big tech is more evil, but it's more predictable, which is a useful property to have if you want to regulate or prevent, you know, certain forms of externalities. It would be good actually if the utopians were not in charge. I think the utopians are the biggest problem, like because they have an ideology, they have a burning ideology that justifies anything basically, as long as it allows them to get to AGI faster. Because I mean, this is always the problem with utopist ideologies: is utopia is so good that it justifies anything. You know, we saw it with like FTX and like others like this. This is always the problem with like consequentialist or like utilitarian ideologies. This is usually the failure mode that happens. Not that all fall for this failure mode, but this is a very common one. Big tech and these like, you know, sociopathic corporations have a different failure modes, which are predictable and they're more competent in dangerous ways. So that if AGI was so far off, I think big tech taking over AI would be less dangerous. The problem is if AGI is not far off. If AGI is not far off, then and big tech companies believe this, for example, because the utopists convinced them of this, then you're in big trouble. Then you're in really, really big trouble. And you are even more in trouble if nation states get involved. So let's talk about Entente. So recently, there has been an emergent faction, which is kind of basically the same faction I talked about earlier. This is Anthropic, Open Philanthropy, some parts of Rand Corp, and a couple others in this kind of area, who've recently been pushing what they themselves have called the Entente strategy. The Entente strategy is basically try to gaslight and confuse and lie to the US government that the US must race to AGI before China gets it. And let's be very clear about what their intentions here are, is of course, they need to build it. They need to do it for the US, and they have found a trick of how to deceive or, you know, frighten, you know, US military apparatuses, hopefully in order to get them to race to the utopian AGI that they want to build. This is an escalation. This was not really a thing 2 years ago. So this is a recent form of escalation where the utopists have now gone in their dream to build utopia. They have now gone from, you know, their own companies to big tech to going after the state as like the next thing of how to escalate their dream of utopia. And this is extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. It's also wrong. Like, this is a very important thing to understand. This is technically and strategically wrong. It's not that It's true that there is a race happening with China, but what people are missing, but the problem is that it's a race to the death, to the end. It's a nuclear war. You can't win a nuclear war. Funnily, so this strategy is called Entente, as named this way by Dario and Rand. Funnily enough, there is a historical parallel to this. So in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan announced his Strategic Defense Initiative, also called Star Wars, which was a huge government project to build anti-nuclear missile defense systems in space, basically, and to massively ramp up the American nuclear stockpile. And the proponents of this strategy, which was based on a lot of extremely controversial science that was not well backed, most of the scientific community came out against this idea and thought it was completely unfeasible. It was even dangerous because it would provoke the Soviets potentially into a nuclear war even faster, and so on. Because if they were to succeed at building a perfect shield against nuclear weapons, then the Soviets might be incentivized to strike before the shield is complete, because use it or lose it. So this could potentially cause the exact nuclear war that they were warning from. But even more crazy than this, I didn't know this until I recently started reading a bit of history about this, is that proponents of SDI literally argued that they could win a nuclear war and that we should. They literally argued that we build a perfect nuclear defense system and then we nuke the Soviets. And this was an actual thing that actual people suggested. And then therefore we would have perfect, American military hegemony forever. And the thing that pushed against this was a coalition of scientists, civil groups, etc., called the Détente. And the Détente basically argued that, no, you can't win a nuclear war. I mean, both you're provoking the Soviets into nuclear war ahead of time, which is the same thing that's happened with an AGI race. If the Chinese actually think that we are getting close to AGI and that we will use this to, destroy the Chinese state, well, what do you think they're going to do? I don't think there's a peaceful solution here. It's going to be ugly. And the second thing is that you can't win a nuclear war. So Carl Sagan actually proposed and validated this theory of nuclear winter. And this was one of the decisive killing blows against SDI. Is he showed even if one were to nuke the Soviets or whatever, you still get nuclear winter and everyone loses. So there is no winning strategy. You can't win a nuclear war. Everyone loses. And the same thing is happening with AGI right now. You can't win an AGI arms race. The only winner is AGI.
What do you think they would say in response to what you just said? Why? So they must be aware that, for example, if China begins to sense that the US is close to AGI and their intelligence points to the US using that AGI to basically control the future of the world. The CEOs of the AGI corporations are aware that China has nuclear weapons and so on. What's their response to what you just said?
I mean, it depends on which one you asked. I think most of them have just literally never thought about this. A lot of this is not well thought through, to be clear. Most of this is not well thought through. Some of them think through it, but most of this is just not well thought through. Most of them, it's just well, we don't have a choice. This is the main counter argument. It's we don't have a choice. If we race to AGI and we die, well, not our fault. Nothing we could have done. There is a strong self-imposed nihilism where just people decide that there is no third option. They decide that, well, China's racing. Stopping them is ontologically impossible. So therefore, racing is the only ontologically acceptable solution. And if racing kills us, then we are already dead. And so there's no reason to even try.
What's interesting about the China counter-argument to AI risk is that it's in some sense the first thing that people go to when you talk about trying to perhaps slow down, perhaps pause the AI race that's going on. I mean, I don't think it's a bad argument. I think there's actually something to be very aware of there. It seems that the current kind of philosophy of the Chinese government wouldn't be the right philosophy to rule the world forever, right? So we don't want that. And so even though it's kind of the first argument that people go to, I think it's still kind of a live argument. Do you agree that it's a live argument?
Yes, but it's wrong. It's live, but it's wrong. It's just not true. This is very important to understand. The argument is false. The argument is invalid. It doesn't apply to our reality. The problem isn't that we know how to build a safe AGI, and it's just a question of who gets to press the button. That's not the problem. The problem is AGI kills everybody. And if you race to the bottom, you build AGI as fast as possible. There will be no safety. There will be no alignment. There will be no American AGI. That's not what's going to happen. There's just going to be unaligned AGI. Like, this is not a prisoner's dilemma. This is important to understand. This is not a prisoner's dilemma. People pretend this is a prisoner's dilemma. It's not. In a prisoner's dilemma, you always benefit from defection. Like, so even if the other person is already defected, if you defect, you get a better outcome. This is not the case here. If China raises to AGI, we die. If we then also raise to AGI, we just die marginally faster. This doesn't help. This does not improve the situation. This is not, like, this is a very deep thing. This is a very important to understand. If you read, for example, Leopold Aschenbrenner's making exactly this point, he makes this long thing about how AGI is coming, which is like nicely argued and nicely put together and whatever. And then he just kind of says in like one sentence, for alignment, we'll muddle through. Like, that's his whole argument. Like, there's no argument there. He's just like, well, whatever, we have to race. There's no justification. Like, if you actually read the thing, he lets up all these arguments about AGI coming, but actually doesn't make any argument that justifies racing as the correct strategy. He actually doesn't justify this because he doesn't prove that alignment will get solved. It's not there. It's not in the. You can read it. It's not there. There is no reason to believe that if we race to AGI, that we will get safe AGI that does what we want. In fact, there is overwhelming reasons to believe that was not what's going to happen. So the whole premise is flawed. It's just like it's wrong.
One of the points you make or you and your co-authors make in the Compendium is that AI progress over the last decade, say, have been driven mostly by more resources, more data, more compute, more talent, more investment, and not equally by kind of deep research breakthroughs. Is this the cause of us not understanding AI deeply enough to make it safe? So is it because that we have grown these systems, as you write, as opposed to building them, that we don't understand them and therefore we don't know how to make them safe?
This is a huge problem related to this. I think so. There's a strange thing that happened. There's many strange things about AI. The fundamental, the kind of like one of the core strange things about AI is, as you say, is that it's grown, not written. It's not that you write line by line the codes of what your AI does. It's more like you have a huge pile of data and you grow a program on top of this data that like solves your problem, which is a very strange way to do programming, but it works empirically. So, but like we don't really understand these programs that get generated. They do strange things all the time that we don't understand or that we don't know how to control, and we have no way of predicting what they will be capable of or not before they're made in various ways. This is very curious because this is kind of different from how capabilities tend to work in normal software. In normal software, as you add more features to your software, as you make it more powerful, as you make your system more capable and more things, you build up complexity. Like your program gets more and more complex, and it gets harder and harder to manage. And usually, eventually, you will reach some limit of like what complexity you or your organization can handle, and then your program just like freezes in what it's capable of doing, or it collapses and just becomes unmaintainable. Like, this is the normal life cycle for software, and then you have to like start over or like break it into multiple parts, or you're just stuck. Like, there are many companies, massive corporations, whose whole job is just like parasitically living off one huge unmaintainable code base that like no one can like actually do things with. Like, this is a very common thing in software. There's to give a bit of flavor to this, there's a very funny story where a guy on Hacker News, which is like a news website, talks about how he used to work at Oracle. So Oracle is a legacy software company. They build like huge Baroque software for like Fortune 500 companies and stuff. And one of the products they sell is the Oracle database, which is just a database. It's not that different from other databases. And he talks about how the code base of the Oracle database is just one of the worst things known to man. It's like 20 million lines of just poorly documented, complicated code that everything interacts with everything. No one knows how it works. It's all relies on literally thousands of flags that just get turned off and all interact with each other in ways that no one understands and are like not documented properly. So whenever you need to change anything about the code or add a new feature, you have to like you change a couple lines of code, and then you have to run literally millions of tests on their huge cluster. And this takes like days, like 3 days to run all these tests. And then you always break thousands of them with every change you make. So then you have to go through each and every one of these tests that you break and just like fiddle with all the flags until you have like the right magic combination of like flags and like bug fixes and like special cases or whatever that all the tests pass. And you add like another flag for your specific weird, bizarre edge case. And then you submit the code and it gets like merged, months later. This is a terrible way to build software. Like this is just truly, truly a terrible way to build software, both pragmatically speaking, but also from a safety perspective. Like I can tell you with confidence that the Oracle database contains horrific security flaws. I can tell you this because there's no way to get them out of there. That thing is too complex. There are some horrific security flaws in there that have not yet been found. I am 100% certain of this, and there's no way for Oracle to get rid of them. There is no way Oracle could take this code base and pragmatically actually find all the bugs. It just can't be done. It's too hard. It's too complex. And so this is how most software is. And the punchline is, of course, is that AI is developed like this too, but worse. Is that AI, you don't even have a code base. You have a neural network. There's no code for you to test, and there's no tests. Sometimes we run evals, but evals are not tests. It's not like we take apart all the individual functions of the AI and test all the individual functions that they're correct. No, it's all a big neural network. So evals are just completely, like trial and error, brute force, and you just like see if the numbers go up or down and they like look good. This is a terrible way to design software. But the crazy thing is that AI allows you to build software in these terrible, terrible, terrible ways while still making it very powerful. And this is where it's different from traditional software. The Oracle database, you can't add crazy new features, at least not easily, because it's just too complex. Like you just run into a bottleneck. With GPT-4, well, just throw more data at it. Bro, just get more GPUs, bro. Just add more complexity, more patterns, just put more in there. Who cares? Like literally, who cares? Just put more shit in there and it gets better. So we have like this kind of like bizarre worst of both worlds or kind of situation where the way AI software is built is so fundamentally in a way that we can like from a cybersecurity perspective, you're just like, holy shit, like there's no possible way to make this safe. Like there's like no way you can have a system like this that does not have bugs. It can't be done. Like it's like if you think this, you're crazy. And at the same time, you can make it extremely powerful. Because in the past, software at least would like plateau in its power, so to speak, because it would just get too complex and it'll start breaking. But AI, to a large degree, doesn't have this property. So we can build extremely powerful systems that can do extremely powerful things while having just the most complex bugs known to man. Just bugs that are so hard to understand, so hard to debug, so hard to even, fathom or find that's like impossible. And the reason this is so important is, let's be very clear here. When people talk about stuff like, oh, America will build good AGI that makes the good future, let's be very clear what they're saying here. They're saying we're going to solve all of moral philosophy, all the problems our institutions, our governments, our states, our militaries are trying to solve, all political problems, all resource allocation problems, scientific problems, interpersonal problems, social problems, all of these problems using software, and there will be no bugs. That's what they're saying. That's insane.
I agree that there must be many bugs different from how bugs would appear in traditional software, but kind of a failure, you could say, in the weights of GPT-4, for example. But these are not so consequential as to prevent us from, or prevent OpenAI from offering a useful product. So what is it that's going to change in the future? OpenAI has offered this chat product for a number of years now. Nothing has gone fantastically wrong yet. So what is it you expect to change in the future such that the bugs, you could say, in our models become more problematic?
To be clear, many things have gone fantastically wrong. Like this is like, people keep saying this is not true. Like social media is now insane. Like even more so. This is a massive externality on humanity and its epistemology. This is a huge, huge blow to humanity. This is a massive cost that every time I go on social media, there is no way for me to know whether this eloquent person responding to my arguments is a person or not. This is a massive cost that was imposed unilaterally on humanity. It is now much harder to build coalitions online. It is much harder to understand. Scams have become much more sophisticated, much more mass producible. Deep fakes, political things. All the kind of shit that's been happening also in like third world countries. Where like genocides and so on have been being pushed by these kind of things. Let's be very, very clear here. I agree that there is a difference, and AGI is a huge problem, whatever. But the fact that like AI has not had huge consequences is just wrong. There is a massive unpaid externality. Like our boomer parents are just driven insane by like social media and like AI generated slop. And like artists are being eviscerated alive. All these various entertainment businesses are falling apart. Like this like human shared tradition of like art and beauty is falling apart. Like these are massive costs. Like they're not deadly. We're not going to die from them, but they are huge. They are huge, 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 huge costs that we are paying, and that society is paying, and there's no way to do back. So we could say it's worth it. Like, you could make the argument, sure, maybe it supercharges, propaganda and psyops and marketing and like all these other, manipulation stuff, but that's fine because ChatGPT is that good. Fair. Like that's an argument you could make, but it's not free. This was not free. But to get back to your actual question. So your actual question was what changes? And yes, so I actually was talking to another AI researcher about this recently, who kind of pointed out that like, well, you're concerned about like these like AGI and like these like super intelligent risks and so on, but like, look at ChatGPT, it's really smart. We don't have this problem. And the thing is basically, ChatGPT is very smart and like way smarter than people think it is. And so are like Claude and like other AI systems, but they're not literally human level, because like I can't just replace a senior engineer or a senior manager with ChatGPT with no modifications yet. So my argument is that there are some things that are still missing. There are some like I can put a human and as a CEO of a company and it works. You can't currently do that with ChatGPT. ChatGPT can help. It can do many of the tasks that a CEO would have to do. Many of the tasks a CEO do can now be automated by a ChatGPT, but it's not 100% yet. Very importantly, I don't think intelligence is something magical. It's not a discrete property where you have like some magic algorithm and you add the magic math and then it becomes intelligent, or otherwise it's not. I think there is a very common thing where people say it's not true intelligence, it's not true planning, or it's not true, etc. Blah blah blah. We argue this in the compendium as well. I think this is just this is pseudoscientific and just like really bad reasoning, where intelligence is made of smaller parts. Like whatever intelligence, general intelligence, human intelligence is, it's made of a bunch of smaller tasks. I'm the CEO of a company. When I do something, the way I run my company is composed of smaller tasks. There are many, many smaller things I need to do. I need to talk to people. I need to reason about people's mental states. I need to reason about the economy. I need to reason about products. I need to make decisions. I need to communicate. I need to write things. But all these things are tasks. They can be understood. They can be automated. And ChatGPT can do a lot of the tasks I do day to day. It can't quite do all of them yet, but I expect as we get to more and more general systems with longer and longer memories and coherency and so on, that slowly but surely, eventually it will be all of them. And once you have a system that is stable and long-lasting and so enough to completely replace a human, you have a system that can do AI research. You have a system that can improve AI further. And you also have a system that you can instantly copy onto millions of GPUs, a system that never gets tired, that never gets bored, that has read every book ever written, that runs, tens or hundreds or thousands of times faster than any researcher in the world. So the moment you have a system, one system that is as smart as a human, that has this kind of, goes from the 90% to 100% and to 110% or whatever, once you have such a system, you can instantly scale it up to 1,000, a million X, and you immediately will have something that is vastly smarter than humanity. And it can improve itself, that can get more power, that can develop new technology. And this will be a complete step change, and this can happen extremely quickly. So for me, AGI is defined as a system that can do everything a human could at a computer. Once we have one such system, we will get ASI, artificial superintelligence, which I define as a system that is smarter than all of humanity in short order, like I think 6 months or less.
just because you would have a bunch of, call them virtual researchers, doing a bunch of additional AI research and quickly making progress. And so I'm guessing, I take your point here to be that the bugs that show up in these kind of agents of the future that can reason, that can plan, that can think long term, those bugs will be much more consequential because now you have a bunch of virtual people spread out in all institutions quite quickly. Yeah, is that your explanation?
If I told you that OpenAI just announced their virtual humans program, where they are going to release 80 billion virtual humans onto the net next week, would you feel good about this? Could we even guarantee they wouldn't immediately declare war on us or like steal our resources, or who knows what they would do, right? Like, and it's going to be worse than that. These are not going to be humans. These are going to be weird alien machines that are, have all these weird bugs that we don't understand, that can have extremely weird behavior, that are being built by for-profit corporations to make them profit. To be clear, like, these are being built by sociopathic entities to maximize sociopathic functions, profit, and you'll have massive amounts of them that expand extremely rapidly. That you can scale them up extremely quickly. They can all, if one of them learns something, you can immediately send it to all the copies. Like, if one human figures out something, that doesn't mean humanity knows it. With AI, it's different. If one AI figures something out, all AIs can know it in a second. Like, even if the system itself is like not massively smarter than a human to start, it will get all of these superpowers for free. It will be able to copy itself. It will be able to run at faster speed. It will have access to, vast memory banks. It will never get bored. It will never get tired. It doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have to, all these things. Like, if I just had like a guy who works 24/7, is as smart as John von Neumann, never sleeps, never gets tired, and never gets distracted, this is already like by far the smartest thing on the planet.
You could even trade off speed for kind of raw intelligence, where if a machine or an AI could work incredibly quickly, that could make up for it being kind of dumber than us in a sense. I would expect speed to also be a very important factor. And as you mentioned, not getting tired, not getting distracted. I mean, when we try as humans to achieve a task, right, there's a lot of kind of superfluous activity and anxiety and all kinds of things that distracts us. But these models would not kind of face those same hurdles, and so they would probably go very directly and very ruthlessly to the goal they have in mind. One question here is, so when I was 18, I considered taking a driver's license, and I decided against it because I saw all of the progress that was being made in self-driving cars. This is a while ago now. And so there I concluded that we seem to be so close to having kind of full self-driving, and you could say, okay, we seem to be getting quite close to human level in these kind of chatbot models we have right now. If we can just fix things, or perhaps unhobble the models, or add some other features, make them talk to themselves and so on, we can get to agents. Is there a similar problem to self-driving, where getting close to being reliable enough to be useful is useless in a sense, where getting that last percent or so of reliableness makes the entire difference of whether you can deploy an agent usefully in the workforce?
I think there's some of this, but you can also think of things differently. If you're on an exponential, and let's say you've been on this exponential, let's say it doubles every 2 years, right? Let's say, just, hypothetical. Now, let's say you've been on this exponential for 100 years or something, and it's gone from 0 to like 3 or something over this time. You can pick a exponential or whatever that like started low enough that it like moved slow enough to get to this, right? And now you say, wow, we spent 100 years and we only got 3 units of progress. So like, this is going, if we want to get to 100 units of progress, this is going to take literally 3,000 years. And this would be a reasonable argument to be made, right? But the true answer is that it will go 3, 6, 12, 24, 48, and you're 100 in 6 units, so 12 years later.
Although this is for the raw intelligence of the models, I'm guessing, right? Where we see this kind of progress, but we don't. I mean, do we have good measures of agency in AI models?
This is this important thing, right? Agency. What does that mean?
Exactly.
It doesn't mean anything. It's pseudoscientific. It's not a real concept. It doesn't defer to anything in reality. It's just a word that people use to come up with like whether it's agency or planning or consciousness or something. These don't refer to actual physical or like algorithmic properties. Some people use them to refer to specific things. And if you're referring to a specific algorithmic property, great, happy to talk about that. But I expect it's more of a vibe.
Yeah, maybe it's a vibe, but we can put that word to the side and then talk about perhaps ability to achieve a goal over a longer time horizon, for example.
Yeah, and we're getting exponentially better at that.
Yeah, yeah, maybe we are. Maybe we are. So your point is whenever we try to kind of specify what we mean by agency, we see that it dissolves into something measurable, and that which is measurable, we're improving at.
Exactly. This is my fundamental thesis around intelligence, is that if you actually go very, very deep and into any of these concepts that seem to be missing, they dissolve. They are fundamentally, it's all just information processing. It's all just patterns. It's all just smaller tasks. And we are getting better at all of them. Some of them more than others and so on. And some of them are harder than others and they will take a bit longer. But if you're on an exponential, it doesn't matter. 50% of the progress happens in the last unit of time. Like if you're at 50% and you're like, wow, this is going to take quite a while, we're only 50% of the way there, you're wrong. It's only 1 unit of time away. So if we're at 50% of, hypothetical last mile driving, well, it means it's only going to take, 1 more year or 2 more years to fix. I'm not saying this is literally what's going to happen, but like, this is like the kinds of ways you should be thinking about this, right? So like, and also like with like self-driving cars specifically, there's a bunch of other stuff like regulation that slow things down. Like Waymo does have self-driving cars and they do work. Like they do exist.
In specific cities, though, right?
Yeah, but like San Francisco is a terrible city to drive in. Have you driven in San Francisco before? That's not an easy city to drive in. So like, it's like I agree, Phoenix is an easy city to drive in, but like San Francisco is not an easy city to drive in. So like sure, we can argue, oh, it's still unperfect, it still makes mistakes. Sure, of course, whatever, right? But I'm just like, also they have like a GPU in there or 2, or whatever, right? It's like I expect if you and like what we're also seeing right now with like robotics is we're seeing this massive revolution in foundation models for robotics. Where like I remember 2 or 3 years ago, people were like, robotics, impossible. Deep learning, no, can't do it, right? And now we just like take language models, train them on data, and then ask them to do things, and they do. Like if anyone is not, just like go to the DeepMind blog and just like look at like the last like 3 papers they published on like robotics, and just like have your mind blown. It's just like literally like lol, we asked the robot to do something and it did.
Yeah, it's actually amazing to look into this. I wouldn't have expected it to work out this way, in which you have a vision model looking at a scene, writing down what it sees. You can then kind of give instructions in written language, in kind of natural language, English, and say, pick up the apple. Of course, there's a bunch of very advanced stuff going on underneath that, but it's just interesting that it could be that simple in a sense. Okay, in the compendium, you call for an actual science of intelligence, and I think this is what we're kind of debating or talking about right now. What we're missing is a developed science of what intelligence is, how it works, how it can be grown. What do you think such a science would look like?
I obviously don't know. Like, this is an extremely hard question. I have some suspicions. I have a suspicion that it will look more like computational learning theory, less like computational complexity theory, but like also lots of computational complexity theory.
That difference, you gotta explain that difference.
Do I? Okay, I'll say a couple interesting things, and then I won't go into it too much because it's just it's just schizo stuff. It's just like these are some things. There is something wrong with p space, and so what I mean by this is that everyone knows about p versus np. It's like there are problems that are in a class called p, polynomial time, p time, and there's another one called non-deterministic polynomial time. And it seems like these two should be different, but we haven't proved this. Everyone knows this. Very famous example in computer science, right? But a lot of people don't know, we also can't prove the difference between p time and p space, which is insane. P space means you have polynomial amounts of memory, but infinite time. And we can't prove that there are things that are computable in p space that might also be computable in like p time. This is insane. What this tells me is we got something deeply wrong about computation. Something about how we think about math, computation, intelligence is wrong. I don't know what it is. There's like something about like the unit of work. Like, what is a unit of math? If I do one math, what is that unit? Because like there's a thing, so there's a little bit of this in what's called algorithmic information theory. In algorithmic information, I think it was algorithmic information theory. I'm actually getting that wrong. The comments will yell at me if I got this wrong. Where you can prove that for a sorting algorithm, there is a minimum complexity of the program. Like there's no way to make a sorting algorithm that is less than like n log n or something like this. This is like the only result that I'm aware of this type. We can't prove this for almost anything else. But intuitively, what a science of intelligence would look like would be something like, to be able to drive a car, you must be at least this intelligent. This is what it would look like. And the closest thing we have to this is algorithmic information theory, which has proved this thing of like, if you want to sort something, your algorithm must be at least this complex. This is the kind of things you were looking for. I don't think we can even do this because I think our math is wrong. Like there's just like something super deeply wrong about how we're thinking about mathematics and how we're thinking about computation, that we are just super confused about intelligence. That like intelligence is like super, super hard, but we're already getting like computation wrong. And I expect once we're less confused about what computation is and what learning is and these kind of stuff, then intelligence will become more and more clear what it is and how to think about it and how to formalize a statement such as, in order to drive a car, you must be at least this smart. I think we are so far away from this. This would take like generations of mathematicians and like computer scientists. I think this is like probably like as hard or harder than P versus NP to get right. I do think we can make a lot of progress on like empirical or like, approximate theories that like are not really true. But I also think that's very, very hard. And it's one that's like a surprisingly small number of people are working on, to my understanding.
How would you categorize scaling laws? Would that be kind of like an engineering of intelligence and not really a science of intelligence?
I think it's more like alchemy.
Alchemy of intelligence. Okay, so we're not even at the stage where we have like the engineering textbooks and some kind of like equations for how our models behave.
Like the scaling laws are much closer to naturalism. Like it's more like Victorians looking at bugs and finding that there's like a symmetry between different bug sizes. It's like there is a pattern there, right? And like it might be an interesting pattern, might not be an interesting pattern. But like the way that like say Victorian naturalists categorized animals into species turned out to be like super wrong once we figured out genetics, right? And we find out that there's a deeper pattern in nature than, they didn't get everything wrong when they said like, wow, lions and tigers sure look similar. They kind of look like cats, probably related. Yeah, they were right? Like, I'm not saying naturalists were stupid, or anything. Same way I'm not saying that someone who like does empirical work on AI is stupid. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like there are deeper patterns that you can't find through naturalism.
No. I mean, the scaling laws are kind of a great insight. It's just the question of what do they mean in practice, right? What is it that you can predict? It's not exact capabilities. It's not.
You can't predict anything, basically. You can predict a specific, like, approximate number, which is the loss. But how the loss relates to any capabilities we actually care about, like you need this loss to be able to drive a car, which would be the kind of result we actually want to have, is just like not even in the same universe. Research into scaling laws will not get us to an answer there. We would have to go at this from a completely different perspective. We'd have to come from like computational learning or like an algorithmic information theory perspective if we want to answer or like even formalize a question like this. And we are like scaling laws is not even trying to do this. This is an important thing to understand. It's not that they're trying to do this and they're failing. They're not even trying to do this. It just has a different goal. That the goal of scaling laws is, well, A, create hype and raise money, and 2, empirically allow you to, predict if I put in this amount of money or effort or whatever, like how should I split my resources to get like all things equal, the best outcome, which is a fair thing. Like that's what a lot of alchemists did. Like if you read alchemical texts, a lot of the alchemical texts would be like, oh, if you want sulfur, here's the things you mix and then it makes sulfur, and like careful, don't heat it too hot or it will be bad and stuff like this.
We talked earlier about how it could be a good thing if big tech takes over from the utopian kind of founders of the AGI corporations, if timelines were long. You don't seem to believe that. You're worried that timelines might be quite short. Does this have to do with specifically kind of agents helping us do AI research? Or do you expect, is that a crucial piece of timelines being short for you?
It's neither necessary nor sufficient, but it is a part of it. Like it is a part of why I expect things to happen. But there are worlds in which that's not the crucial piece. Like for me, like I am a stupid ape. I have little neurons, so I try to keep my model simple. I look at intelligence. I look at what it's made of. It's made of all these little parts. All these little parts, systems keep getting better at. I look around in the world, more and more jobs get automated by these things. They talk more and more betterer. And I'm like, well,
talk to me about automation, because when I interview economists, one thing they tend to agree on is that this automation, if it's happening, it's not showing up in the official numbers yet. So when you see automation, what is it that you see?
Here's an example of something that doesn't show up in GDP numbers. Wikipedia. Wikipedia is one of the greatest triumphs of humanity ever. It's one of the most valuable things ever created by humanity, period. Like just Wikipedia is like more valuable than almost any other artifact ever created by man.
It is kind of on the short list of things that you would take with you if you were to travel into space and could only take, something like that.
You show me like a massive dam or a huge building or whatever, and it costs like $10 billion, $100 billion to build or whatever. And that's much less than Wikipedia's worth. Like Wikipedia is obviously worth more than this one building. Like from a pure value perspective, Wikipedia contributes 0 to GDP. It is not part of the GDP measure. It does not show up. It does not change things. As far as economists are concerned, nothing of value has been created here. I think a lot of people confuse what GDP measures and what these are total factor productivity and so on, what they actually measure. I'm not saying they're bad measurements. Again, naturalism. I think a lot of economics is naturalism, and that's fine. I'm not saying this is as a critique. I'm saying if you know what you're measuring, and you know why it's measuring, and its limitations, and in what scenarios it breaks down, that's fine. It's very useful to measure GDP. GDP is a very, very useful number to know and helps you reason about a lot of very useful things. But you also have to understand that it is not reality. It is a very, very flawed metric that doesn't measure everything. Think of the amount of cognition of writing that ChatGPT has performed since inception. And let's say you put an hourly wage of a human on that number. How much do you think that would affect GDP? Do you think it would affect it a lot?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at my own usage of these models, right? I it's a lot.
It would probably destroy the economy 10 times over, right? It would probably be as big or larger than the entire economy if you had actual humans typing out those numbers. Now, of course, the economists will say, that's not what we mean by that. Of course, it reduces the price. But I'm all right, but then you see how this is misleading. So you're saying if I add more writing labor than the entire economy to an economy, it doesn't change. And I'm saying, okay, you can define your metric that way, but that's not necessarily intuitive to people. That's how the metric works, but it is how the metric works. If I invent something that adds 10,000 times more of a certain type of labor, but makes the labor extremely cheap, GDP doesn't change. And so this is very unintuitive to people. And so I think this is the same thing with the slop, right? I think the negative externalities of slop, like AI, garbage and misinformation, is very high, but it's not measured in GDP. If I measure the amount of distraction or confusion or annoyance or whatever that's actually created, if I measured it in hours or minutes and then converted that to working hours, attention, etc., qualities, I expect the impact would be humongous. It would be absolutely massive, but it's not measured. It's not part of GDP. So from the economist's perspective, nothing changed.
That's GDP. What about employment? We aren't seeing kind of a massive rise in unemployment numbers either. So this kind of points us in the direction of perhaps there's some automation happening, but people are finding other jobs, or they're doing other tasks to make up for it. Do you think that's true, or do you think there's also something wrong in the way we're measuring employment?
I think employment is a good example of a number which is relatively like relatively intuitive what it measures. Like it's like GDP, I feel like specifically like quite an unintuitive thing if you haven't thought about it. Like GDP is optimized to measure things that don't change, and this is very unintuitive to people. Like people think if a great change happens, GDP must change, but it's actually the opposite of what GDP does. GDP changes little when you have big changes in like prices and like things and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I know you just made this point, but we can think about the availability of just entertainment or movies or something, which has increased a lot since before the internet, right? But this isn't really showing up because you're paying a Netflix subscription now. Perhaps this is even decreasing GDP numbers because you're not renting as many movies at Blockbuster as your parents did, maybe.
Exactly. It's another great example of this effect. Employment is a bit stricter, not quite. There's some problems there as well, but like it's much clearer. So I think there is a real thing there. I mean, one thing I think is that jobs are sticky in the economic sense, is that jobs are not liquid in the same way that like many other things in the market are. So it just like literally takes time. Jobs have a lot of transaction costs, there's a lot of frictions, there's a lot of social aspects to it as well. And the AI is just not quite AGI yet. I expect if we froze AI as it is today and we waited 50 years, I think things would be different. I think if people integrate these things more, new companies get created who don't have like this like baggage of like previous companies. Another thing is that a lot of employment is not about skills. It's not even about labor. It's about responsibility. I'm not saying that like lawyers or doctors don't do skilled labor. They also do skilled labor. But one of the reasons they get paid high salaries is they're responsible. You're paying them to be at fault if something goes wrong. This is a lot of what we pay people to do. We pay people lots of money often to be responsible, to be the part of a chain which owns something. Currently, or at least in our legal systems, AIs cannot do this. This is a type of labor that AI cannot perform, not because they're intellectually incapable of doing it, but because the social contract does not allow machines or AIs to be responsible for things or to own things. I expect if we had a different culture that, for example, does allow AIs to own or be responsible for things, it would be very different.
Yeah, and perhaps this is why we could see lawyers getting rewarded for AI progress, like earning much more money, at least in the short term, because now they can write whatever 100 legal briefs or 100 legal documents in the time that they previously could write one.
Yeah, I agree with this. This is actually a hot take I have as well. I think paralegals are really screwed because I think paralegals mostly do skilled labor, and I think skilled labor is going to zero. But
it's going to zero. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to zero, obviously. But like the thing with skilled labor is that lawyers do skilled labor, but one of the main things they do is that they provide authority, they provide responsibility, and they take responsibility for things. And if commoditize your complement. So if the bottleneck to value becomes authority or responsibility, and you have infinite skilled labor, the scarce resource of responsibility can become extremely valuable.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that perhaps could be the case for other industries as well. I have heard people talking about kind of entry-level programmers also being negatively affected by AI progress because, you can now have a model produce a draft of a code that's pretty good. And so you have the senior programmer review it again, as you talked about, with kind of authority to approve and actually change the code. Do you think this is kind of like this is an effect you see we're going to see across the economy, that entry level jobs are facing a lot of competition from models?
My prediction is that skilled labor that can be performed on a computer is under threat. Things that are based on authority or responsibility will, at least in the short term, benefit and will become more valuable rather than less valuable. And I expect all of this will be completely irrelevant once AGI arrives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we are talking about jobs, I think one prediction I've heard is that we will move into more kind of social jobs, or call them perhaps pseudo jobs. So perhaps we could take my job as an example, right? If you talk to my farmer ancestors, they wouldn't consider this an actual job, but this is more of a social function or something that you might do for fun or something. If we have, setting aside issues of existential risk from AI, if we have an economy that is automated to a higher and higher degree, could we end up in roles where we function based on our relationships to other people, based on kind of historical factors, based on being the owners of various entities and assets and so on.
So unfortunately, the question you just asked is just nonsensical if we ignore X risk. Like, there is no way to answer this question without thinking about AGI. Otherwise, you're just not talking about actual reality. So you could ask the question, for example, assuming we align AGI, what will I be doing? Or like, will I have a job? Or will something else happen? This is a question you could ask. I'm not saying it is the question you did ask, but like this is like a question you could ask. I'm not saying I have a good answer to it, but like a big question. But like saying like assume AGI doesn't happen, will there be jobs or whatever? It's just like that's not how the world works. Like this is not what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're saying we can't get to extremely advanced AI without facing the problems of not having solved the alignment issue.
Yes, like definitionally. Like the alignment problem is how do you connect causally your desires, values, wishes, whatever, to what actually happens in reality. And if reality is mediated through the power of an AGI or an ASI system, which it will by definition, once an ASI system exists, the causal control of the future lies in the ASI. Humanity is no longer relevant. So the only way that humanity still has a causal connection to how the future goes is if we have a causal connection from our values through the ASI to the future. Like it's the big filter. You know, it's the big filter. Is like either your human values get through the ASI or they don't. If they don't get through, the ASI does whatever it does, right? So if you have solved the problem of how to get your human values causally through an ASI to make it act in ways to instantiate the things we wanted to instantiate in the future, you have solved the alignment problem. That is the alignment problem. So there's no way to get around this.
In the Compendium, you write about how this is humanity's most complex technical challenge, or at least it's one of the most complex technical problems we face. Why is it so complex? Why is it that we can't take some of the advances that OpenAI has made in, for example, making the model, making a ChatGPT talk in a nicer way to you, not using certain words and so on? Why isn't that progress towards alignment? Why isn't this an incremental problem and a problem that we are making kind of steady progress towards?
So there's a couple questions there that I think is worth kind of disentangling a little bit. Like one question is like, why is alignment hard? Another question is, how hard is it? Another question is, how expensive is it? Which is a related but different question. Another question is the things that are being done progress towards AGI? Another question is, why isn't alignment an iterative problem? Is it an iterative problem?
Yeah, those are actually 7 different problems.
I'm going to reshuffle these questions a bit in the ordering and answer them in a slightly different order. So I'm going to start by answering the iterative question. Is alignment iterative question a problem? And if not, why not? Like most things are iterative. Why is this not? So alignment could be an iterative problem. There is a way to solve alignment iteratively. But it sure as fuck doesn't look like let's build the biggest model we can as fast as possible before China doesn't just yeet it out onto the world. That's not how you iterate. So if it was that every single time a new language model or a new AI system is built, everyone's like, all right, guys, shut down all the GPUs until we've understood every single neuron, until we have a formal theory of how everything works, until we've unsolved all the bugs, and then after we've understood every single part, then we build the next AI. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, that would work. Like, I think that would work. I'm not saying this is realistic, but this is like, that would be an example of how to address alignment iteratively, would be to like actually take small steps. What's happening right now is not that we are taking small steps. So when people talk about iterative alignment, it's a misnomer. It's like, it's just not true. Is they're not talking about we will take the smallest step possible that is safe. What they're saying is we'll take the largest step possible that I think I can get away with, and then take them as often and as fast as possible. And this is not a good outcome because, again, ASI is the filter. If you build ASI and it is not controlled, it's game over. Simple as that. Humanity has no longer any causal effect on the future. You know, whether we die immediately or we hang around for a little bit, who knows? But fundamentally, humanity just has nothing to say anymore. We're just like, chimps in a zoo or whatever, right? Like there's nothing for us to do, and probably the AI stops feeding us. So it's over. So when you are working on a technology which could blow you up, if you want to actually succeed at that, you have to be very, very sure that every experiment you do will not blow you up. Otherwise, you blow up. It's that simple, right? It's literally that simple. If you are making explosives, you have to be very sure that every step of your process doesn't blow up. Otherwise, you don't make explosives, you die. It is that easy. So that's why it's not an iterative problem. Because not because it couldn't be an iterative problem. It's because people are deciding to approach it like, how can I mix chemicals as fast as possible to get to the biggest explosive I can? If you do this, you die. It's not because this couldn't hypothetically work. You can actually make explosives safely. This is a thing that can be done, but it's not done by doing it as fast as possible before China gets the explosives. That's just not how the world works. Right? There is some work that is being done on, AI safety and, allegedly alignment, like getting chatbots to say what we want. And this is all like cute, but it's alchemy. Like, if you look at the actual things being done, it's not science, it's not engineering. Let me give you an example of something that is like closer to real alignment work. Fixing a bug in the C++ compiler. This is much closer to alignment than most of the work that is being done at OpenAI. The reason is that when you're building a compiler, you are trying to build a system that causally connects the will of the user to the will of the machine. This is literally what you're doing, right? You're literally building a thing where humans speak a language and like confer a will that is then absorbed by the machine and then causes the machine to causally do in reality the thing the human asked for. This is much closer to actual alignment than most of the work that is being done at these labs. Hot take. And most of the work at these labs is of the form, my AI does something I don't like, I hit it with a stick until it stops doing that. And then once it looks like it's not doing it anymore, I give myself a pat on the back and publish a paper about it. This is cute. I think it makes a better product. Like, to be clear, I think I use ChatGPT, I use Claude. I mean, Claude's better than ChatGPT. Yeah, Claude gang, rise up. And they're good products, right? Like, Claude is stupid sometimes or makes mistakes or says things I don't like or something or whatever. But like, who cares, right? Like, whatever. Like, I don't need it to be 100% to like provide me value. Fine. If we build a system with the level of reliability Claude has and we give it causal, physical access to reality and superintelligence, that's not fine. It's a much, much higher risk scenario. You can have a bit of a stupid, funny, goofy thing if it's an entertainment product or like, or something like this. You can't have the same level of reliability when we're talking about nuclear control, when we're talking about, governmental control, military, like, real world things like this, which is what ASI will be. ASI will be systems. So the level of reliability you need when you're dealing with an ASI scenario is just exponentially higher than the reliability you need with normal systems. And it's kind of like the rocket problem, where like, to get to the moon, you don't build bigger and bigger ladders. That'll never get you to the moon. It's like structurally, a ladder cannot get you to the moon. It can't be done. You need to invent a rocket. And a rocket is a way more complicated, way more confusing thing. So if you went back to, the Middle Ages and you told people, oh, in the future went to the moon, and they said, oh, we did it using a special ladder, they'll be like, all right, yep, seems reasonable, I guess. Like, maybe they have some like special metal in the future that's like indestructible. So like, yeah, okay, seems like that could be possible. If you said we did a rocket, they'll be like, what are you talking about? That word doesn't even exist in our language. Like, I don't even know what that means. Okay, some people in the Middle Ages, knew about gunpowder, but like most people, like, that word doesn't translate. I don't know what you're talking about. The same thing applies to AI, is that most of what we're doing right now is building ladders. We're hitting it with sticks, to be clear, bigger and bigger sticks. And like, big sticks have, economic value, but this will not structurally get you to a point where you actually understand the internal cognition of these systems and they're actually safe at a level that you would entrust them with, like, say, ASI level control over reality.
And so the difference, the hurdle we can't get over is that we can't provide good enough feedback to more and more advanced model. Is that the main issue?
That is another issue. Like, this is where the thing defeats itself in its own theory. So like, I think it fails even before then, to be clear. Like, I think it structurally is kind of nonsensical. So, well, the most common form of these like iterative alignment proposals that people make is something like, if we give the machines the right feedback, that things are good or bad, we can steer them towards the directions that we want. I already reject this premise. This is already not true. Have you heard of the concept of lying? Like, I'm not sure if these people have just like never met another human. Like, have you, like, oh, if I just give a human the right feedback, they will do an arbitrary thing I ask them for and never deceive me. Like, have you met another intelligent, even like a chimp, a dog? Like, dogs know how to lie, if they can get more treats out of you. Like, if you just give them the right feedback, yeah, they'll just do what gives them more treats. Even maybe your wife got up earlier and fed the dog, and then he's going to ask you for even more food when you wake up. It's like, is the dog unaligned? I mean, it's like there's a deep thing where like I already reject this premise. It's just like feedback by itself is not a sufficient mechanism to guarantee the kind of high level reliability that you require. I think it is enough for like, dog level alignment, maybe, probably not even that. But like, for ChatGPT level alignment, right? Like it says the nice thing most of the time, is mostly fine, whatever, right? I think for that, yeah, it's fine. But this is just not sufficient. So the second thing is that there's the second premise is that this is sufficient for an ASI. Is that if we have an ASI that's as aligned as ChatGPT, that's fine. And this is just like obviously blatantly not true to me. Like, what are you talking about? This is a much more complex scenario where it's much more on the line. It is much more complex. It has way more edge cases. That is like, it's like the thing I was saying earlier. You're saying you want to solve all of the problems that all of our institutions throughout all of history have tried to solve. You want to solve all of moral philosophy, all of economics, all of science. You want to solve all these problems using software with that level of bugs. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, that's not how reality works. If you are trying to solve a problem that is that hard, like you need a much, like, unbelievably higher level of reliability. And this is like this is one of my core things, is that I think people just like think ASI is just going to be like ChatGPT, but a bit cleverer. And this is just not what we're talking about. We're talking more like, imagine the US government was sentient and like smarter than everyone on the planet. Like, that's what we're talking about. That's what an ASI would look like.
Yeah, it's not a more advanced chatbot. It's a much more advanced kind of system that can solve tasks in many domains, and many more domains than our chatbots today.
Like, imagine if the entire US government, like every single person in the US government, was out to get you. For our schizophrenic listeners, they're not out to get you. Don't worry. This is just a hypothetical. You're safe. But like, imagine for a second, the entire US government was out to get you and just screw you over in every way possible. Could you defend against this? No, you couldn't. You'd be completely overwhelmed. Like, they'd come left, right, all over, like from all possible angles. You would be outmatched, outclassed. You would be tricked. You'd be deceived. You'd be brutalized. Like, there would be no possible defense against a thing like this, right? It would just, and like even now, right? Like, we have US government, right? Which is like sort of aligned sometimes, right? But still, it's just like heinously evil things for no good reason. Like recently there's that story about the squirrel that got killed or whatever, right? And like, I don't think anyone really wanted to kill the squirrel. I don't think any individual person was like, haha, I sure love killing lovely little squirrels. But it happened anyways because the system's a fucking mess. Because it has bugs. Because it's misaligned. It's like the US government does stupid things that are not in its interest and hurt its citizens constantly. Not because they're evil. Like, sure, there's some evil people involved. But like, it's mostly just bugs. It's mostly just the system is buggy. It's just there's many things there that are just like stupid and poorly designed and don't do what they're supposed to do. Now imagine that, but like sentient and a billion times smarter. Like, that's a problem.
If when we are thinking about AGI or superintelligence, we shouldn't imagine ChatGPT that outputs kind of a genius level text for us. What is it that we should imagine? Kind of your mainline scenario. What do you envision happening here? What is the next step? Might be agents, but after that, what comes next?
There's at least two questions here, and the two questions I see here are: what will happen, or like what will an AGI? How will it work? And the second is, what will we see? I think those are very different questions. Because I think the things we will see are not what will be what actually happens. Like, I expect that AGI takeoff will be so complex, it will be so distributed, it will be so confusing that no actual individual person will actually see everything that is happening and understand what they're seeing. I expect that for us, when AGI takeoff happens, it will mostly be very confusing. It's just a lot of weird shit happens that we like can't quite explain. And it's like weird behaviors. Social media gets confusing, like a lot of like weird stuff, like political things seem happening, and like the market does some crazy, like weird things or not. And just like a lot of really, and like some new technology starts popping up in some like weird areas. We don't really know what made it or whatever. And then eventually just ends. It's just like most people won't even realize anything's wrong until just like one day you just like stop existing or something. Like this is what my main line of what I expect will happen is that things will just get confusing. They will get more complex. Things will move so quickly and things will change so quickly. Like do you know like what is happening in Ukraine right now?
Not to any level of detail, no.
But it's worse than this. There is no method by which you could acquire actual knowledge of what's really happening in Ukraine. There's no way. Like it's too complex. There's too much going on. The signals are too conflicting. There's too much propaganda. There's like no method by which you could reliably gain actual true information of what is truly happening there.
Actually, my best guess at how to acquire true information is to read the Wikipedia article. That is actually what I do, and that is my attempt, right?
And I'm certain the comments will tell us all about how terrible of an idea that is and all the problems that has. But I agree. I think Wikipedia is genuinely one of our greatest epistemological victories. I also trust Wikipedia more than I trust most sources. Not that Wikipedia is perfect. I am well aware of many of its shortcomings, but that also shows us what our level of epistemic defenses are. If you're actually dealing with a coordinated adversary that is like extremely smarter than you, who's distributed you, it can just make you believe anything it wants, right? So I expect AGI takeoff to mostly be confusing. I don't think it's going to be like epic or even necessarily scary. I think it will mostly be just very confusing and just really weird, and people will be upset and there will be shit happening, but like no one will be sure what's happening or who's happening or like whatever. And maybe there'll be a couple people who get it right by coincidence, who will by coincidence be screaming into the void what's happening, and like they will be drowned out by all the other bullshit happening. And then so just like no one will be able to coordinate, no one will be able to figure out what's happening until it's too late. This is my mainline prediction of what will happen.
Yeah, that's quite depressing. I mean, if we're all confused, then we won't be able to even kind of agree on what's going on or how to respond to it. There isn't really anything to respond to because we don't have kind of like a shared understanding of what's happening.
This is exactly what's happening. I mean, right now, like, the US this is the day before the election. I have people saying things on my, Twitter feed or whatever, like good, normal, sane people where I'm just like, these words are just not connected to reality. This is mental illness. Like, not even just to disagree with them, like politically, to be clear, like just like whether or not this is true, this is an insane thing to say. Like, this is just like, this is not a thing, a normal, like this is what a person having a mental health crisis would be saying. Like the emotions being expressed here, the words being said here, how they're being said, the viciousness, the fighting. It's like, this is how people in a mental health crisis act. This is how schizophrenic people act. And this is a big problem. And this is pre-AGI.
Yeah. Just to push back on this point, we can talk about our epistemic crisis and we are overwhelmed by information and so on. On the other hand, we also have much more information than we had 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And, they were able to somehow kind of navigate the world. I think more information has helped us being kind of better able to navigate the world. Even today, I would say, having kind of governments, businesses, kind of just citizens have much more information. And this, I can't really tell you perhaps in any kind of interesting level of detail what's happening in Ukraine. But I can get you the price of Bitcoin or the price of Apple stock and so on quite reliably. Don't you think that us having access to more information is also kind of leading to better decision making?
So I'm so glad you brought this up because I think this is a great topic to address some common misconceptions about reality. So Yuval Harari, an author I really like, recently wrote a book called Nexus. I love the first half. It's some of my favorite writing I've read in a long time. Second half I found was a bit weaker, but overall the first half is extremely good because he makes a thing I already knew and believed, but like he like lays it out like so much nicer than I've heard anyone else lay it out. Which is fundamentally more information is not truth. These are two different things. They are just not the same thing. More information does not mean more truth. It is often the opposite. Historically speaking, more access to information usually actually did not mean that there were more true things. So, specifically, the common example that people always bring up is the printing press. People always say, what about the printing press? The printing press brought science. It brought the scientific revolution, whatever. And this is just not true. I don't know if people have just like never read a history book, but like this is like historically false. The printing press came 200 years before the scientific revolution. The direct result of the printing press were the witch burnings. So after the printing press was invented, Copernicus's, revolutionary theory about, the heliocentric model didn't even sell out its first edition of like 40 copies. But meanwhile, the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hexenhammer, sold gangbuster. And it was a huge tome describing a conspiracy theory about a satanic pedophilic cabal, which is controls the whole world and is trying to take away your children and to eat them and like whatever, right? It was the prototype for every modern conspiracy theory, and that sold thousands, tens of thousands of copies. The main effect of the printing press was witch burnings and the 30-Year War. Like these were the direct outcomes of the printing press, not the scientific revolution. This is just historically inaccurate. Now, was the printing press an ingredient to the scientific revolution? Yes, of course. Being able to reproduce scientific information was an important, useful, logistical component of the scientific revolution. But if you want to pick one, proximal cause of the scientific revolution, it was probably the founding of the Royal Society in London. That's probably a much closer proximal cause. And that was a social innovation. It was an institutional innovation. And it was an innovation where you were allowed to criticize others. You were allowed to question truth. You were expected to. But, this wasn't the only culture in history that had this norm. But like the Royal Society is like a very clear example of a institution that had these like peer review concept, or this idea of criticizing ideas, that nothing is taken on faith and stuff like this. This is a much more proximal cause for the increase in truth versus noise than more information. More information made people less correct. They made people more wrong. And to a large degree, can you say social media is different? Like, can you say that the proximal cause of social media is more social harmony and cohesion and more democracy? This is not obviously true. Remember in the Arab Spring,
But that's a slightly different point, right? Social media hasn't resulted in more social cohesion, for example. I don't think that's the point. Is that maybe it has resulted in more information being available. And so then the question is whether people can use that information productively to kind of develop accurate models of the world.
But this is like saying I bring you a bunch of like toxic sludge and I say, look, here, there's more biomass. Look, I brought you like food, right? Food is made of biomass. Here's some biomass. Are you happy?
What are some systems we could set up today then to help us kind of navigate the world, specifically as it relates to navigating this dangerous period of developing advanced AI?
Well, there's a specific question of how do we address AI risk specifically, and the more general question of like how do we build like better epistemic norms, how do we build better institutions, and so on. They're closely related. The main difference is that for AI specifically, we're running out of time. So the first thing we need to do is to buy more time. If we ever get ourselves into the scenario where an ASI exists that is not deeply controlled and aligned with humanity, it's game over. So the first and primary policy objective must always be to never get into this situation by whatever means, are the most effective to prevent this from coming about. So my colleagues over at Control AI have written a very nice document called The Narrow Path, which is a set of policy principles, which describes exactly this.
Listeners can scroll back in the feed to hear my interview with Andrea about this document.
Exactly. So I'm sure Andrea did a fantastic job of explaining these better than I could. But basically, these are the proximal direct policies, or the types of policies that would need to be implemented to actually, not die from AGI in the next couple of years. This is the kind of things we need to do. This does not mean, so the narrow path also talks about flourishing. Like, okay, once we're not dying, what do we do then? I think there's a lot to be said there as well. How do we build better science? How do we build more just systems? How do we causally connect what people want and what makes people happy with the future? And this is the fundamental problem of statecraft. right? The fundamental question of statecraft is how do we build superhuman systems, so systems that are larger than humans, that causally connects what the citizens and the people actually want with the outcomes that the state or the larger system produces. And this is a very hard problem, but it is something that we have learned a lot about. We know a lot more about how to build good states. We know a lot more about about epistemology. We know a lot more about many of these things. Like, we didn't have game theory until the 50s. Like, it's crazy to me that we still are running states that are based on constitutions and philosophies, from like Montesquieu and so on, that were invented before game theory existed. That's crazy. That's crazy. We haven't even updated this. So I think there are many low hanging fruits that are mostly blocked by coordination, as always. And like building institutions is pain because you have to deal with people, God forbid. You have to actually work with people and talk to them and build alliances and so on. There are many things that can be done, but they are hard. There are no easy solutions, but they can be done.
Previously, you seem to connect this kind of crisis epistemology to our inability to solve problems around kind of AI risk. But those are not necessarily connected, and perhaps the first step here is the first step isn't that we kind of take it from the ground up and try to solve our kind of sense making tools, and then we try to address AI risk simply because we don't have time. Am I understanding you correctly there?
Yeah, look, if we had infinite time, I think it would be fantastic if we could spend 3 generations of our greatest mathematicians solving the fundamental epistemological problems of mathematics, right? Like, this is what we would do if we were not a stupid civilization. Like, if we were like an actually wise civilization, what we would do is we would actually solve deep problems of mathematics, of philosophy, of spirituality, of religion. Like, there are deep things, like, this is always like taboo to talk about among like technical people, but there are deep things about like human psyches that are like that religions and spirituality do talk about, that are pre-formalized, that are not necessarily physically correct or whatever, but there is stuff there that is very important to people, that is very, very, very important to people, that is a deep part about being human, and is just completely neglected, and it's just not solved. Like, how to make people happy and feel fulfilled and spiritually connected and so on is a problem, like, that needs to be solved. Like, this is a deep thing. You can't build a good society without addressing problems like this, but also questions of like, how do you get different religions to coexist peacefully? How can you create a net positive environment where different spiritual traditions or groups can coexist in a mutually beneficial world? Like, these are deep, deep questions, and they are far from being solved, right? Like, these are very, very hard problems that I think are solvable to some degree. I think, whether moral philosophy is solvable or not is a bit up for debate, but I think there are at least improvements that can be made here a lot. And yes, if we took the time and, at least we should spend, Sundays thinking about these kind of problems. At least I do. But I don't expect we will be able to solve all of these problems before deadline, since deadline is currently in the next couple of years.
If you look at OpenAI, Anthropic, and DeepMind, those are the companies that are currently kind of front runners in the AGI race. And if we are very close to AGI, do you expect those companies, one of those perhaps, to be the one that actually kind of gets there?
Seems quite plausible. I mean, kind of the default case. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if it was an open source thing. I think there's been some work in the open source world which surprised me.
Which work specifically?
Well, wouldn't you like to know?
Okay, you don't want to say what it is publicly.
I prefer not drawing more attention.
Okay, makes sense to me. Yeah, I hadn't actually. I'm not thinking of open source AI as kind of competitive at the cutting edge.
The main thing with open source is that it is way more high variance. It takes because of the way we're distributed, so it takes way more crazy bets. So if you need a crazy thing to work to get to AGI, it seems more likely to happen in open source at the moment than in one of the labs, because the labs are de-risking. Like, as you gain scale, you also have to de-risk. You have to do less crazy things because there's more on the line. Now, my main line, to be clear, is that the de-risking strategy is the thing that gets us to AGI. It's just we scale further, we make more data, and we just do normal amounts, normal kinds of engineering R&D, and it doesn't take anything crazy. But if I'm wrong, and it takes a crazy thing, or there is like, so I do think there are crazy algorithms that have not yet been discovered that are like 10, 100, or 1,000 or a million times more efficient than deep learning. Like I'm pretty sure that's the case. And if those get discovered, they're going to get discovered by like some, malnourished grad student or the open source movement, probably not by one of the big companies.
Yeah, all right. I mean, my main reason for not expecting open source to be at the cutting edge is just that I don't think Meta will fund a kind of increasingly insanely expensive training runs. I think those training runs will be done by DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, supported by each of their big tech funders. Yeah, I'm not sure kind of Meta's investors will let them spend the money. I don't know what you do. Do you think that's true?
I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, so far it seems to be working out really great for Meta. I mean, their stock price is doing fantastic. So, I mean, so far the bet seems to be paying off for them. But that being said, like intelligence isn't magic. I think you can get AGI probably with the same amount of compute as GPT-3. Like if you knew how to do it, you could probably do it with even less than that. Like I think the lower bound on like human or superhuman intelligence is like a 4090 or less. Like it's probably if you had the perfect algorithm, you could even do it just like on a CPU, and like probably a couple. You probably need a decent amount of memory, but like enough that you could like fit it in like a laptop, right? Like a modern laptop. Like it seems like there's no law or like theorem or anything that I know about. Again, because we don't have a metrology, a science of intelligence that doesn't say you can't get human level AGI on a single M1 MacBook. Maybe there's some limitation, but it's not obvious to me. I don't think we're going to get there before we get AGI. I think the first AGI we're going to make is going to be super clunky and take billion time more resources than optimally necessary. But like if we were to stumble upon some of these big breakthroughs, it's like not obvious to me that you need Llama 4, 5, 6, 7 to make it work. I think it makes it easier. Like I think having Llama 3 makes it easier to build AGI than having Llama 2. I think, but I don't think it's like, I think we're already past the event horizon in this regard. Like I think it's already possible to build AGI with just the current tools that exist if you knew how to do it. I'm not saying I know how to do it, but like I expect that if a dedicated group of hackers, and like, a couple 4090s, a couple MacBooks, and Llama 3, and they get very lucky, could already do it.
But that's not the most likely scenario. The most likely is that one of the AGI corporations develop this by running a gigantic training run.
Yeah, running a gigantic training run and also scaffolding around that, like agent scaffolding, etc. Like I think I often joke is that AGI is going to be like GPT n plus 1,000 lines of Python.
Yeah. All right. How efficient are these techniques, do you think? Kind of when we talk about unhoppling or scaffolding or all the things we do after we have finished the training runs. What does that give us in terms of capabilities?
I think that's the difference between AGI and chatbot, basically. I think a lot of scaffolding at the moment is stupid and predictable ways that will get solved. It's like lots of low-hanging fruit, which is like people are just like doing it quite poorly and like in like dumb ways. Also for like it just like there's just like many. It's a large design space, right? Like we've only been doing it for a couple years. We've only had like non-stupid models for a couple years. Right? Like I don't think GPT-2 could get to AGI, no matter how hard you poke it, probably. But like GPT-3, probably not. GPT-4, yeah, no, I think if you had like a GPT-4 level model and you like knew how to do scaffolding correctly, you could get to AGI.
There's a lot of kind of latent intelligence in the models that are not being used right now.
Oh yeah. Like I don't know if you've ever seen someone who's really good at prompting.
I have observed that, and that is insane. What they
they can make models do things you just like would not believe. Like that seem like it shouldn't be possible, right? So like, and again, there's this thing where just like intelligence is composed of smaller components, and like if you actually zoom down on these smallest dissolved components, they're not that big. They're not that complicated. Like GPT-3 can already do formal reasoning, right? You can already teach it, to do math, right? It's like that's already like a lot of the way there. I'm not saying it's all the way there, but it's like this is a lot of the way there. And then, they can learn new facts, they can pattern match, they can do metaphor and logic and whatever, right? And I'm just like, I don't think intelligence is made out of that many things. Like there are things and you need to get them right, but it's more of an engineering problem, right? It's more like, if I show you a lump of uranium, you'd like ore, you'd be like, wow, this is not dangerous at all. Look how far this is from fission. And I'm like, yeah, but now it's just an engineering problem.
Do you think using inference time compute will play a larger role in the kind of future capabilities? And this is where whenever you type into ChatGPT and it says thinking, that's inference time compute. What do you think? I'm not explaining that to you. I'm explaining that to listeners.
Yeah, I mean, seems obvious. I mean, humans do a lot of inference, so seems logical that like if you don't do it in inference time, you have to do it training time, and then you have to pre-bake it, which is just more expensive.
Why is it more expensive?
Because you have to account for every possibility.
You have to kind of lay out exactly what could be asked in.
Yeah, like imagine the difference between writing every possible sorted array versus a sorting algorithm.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Connor, is there anything we haven't touched upon that you want to say to our listeners?
That's a good question. I mean, we could talk a lot about politics and institution design and all these kind of things. I guess the thing I would really like to talk about, maybe just like more thing also direct to listeners a little bit about this, like, well, what do we do? Like, what do we do about this? Like, I haven't justified a lot the extra stuff in this talk. I hope your listeners, dear listener, that you either buy the hypothesis or, you go read the compendium and read why I think this is a problem.
I will link that, and listeners can also scroll back to some of our previous episodes in which you do spend a bunch of time justifying AI risk, or many of the other episodes that we've been doing over the last couple of years.
So I'm not going to justify that further. So I'm going to assume you're bought into this. You're bought into the things I've been saying. What do we do? Like, what are things that you listener might be able to do? And so I think I have a slightly different opinion here, or like at least way of thinking about it than I think a lot of other people do, where when you're confronted with a problem as massive as AI extinction, right? It feels very natural that the response must be massive. That, there's something so huge, you must do something big. You must like drop everything and work on this full time. You need to, yell at all your friends about it. You need to make it your identity. You need to like sacrifice everything, whatever, right? And I'm here to tell you that that is not the right thing to do. The truth is that, I mean, this is just usually very counterproductive because the main thing that will happen if you attempt to do this in most circumstances is just you burn out. And that's not going to help anybody. And now you could say, oh, but I should do it. It's the right thing to do. I won't burn out. I'm like, bro, listen to yourself. Like, this is just not how the real world works. The actual things that need to be done to solve AI, to solve AGI risks, to solve things, are mostly extremely boring. This is very important to understand. Most of the things, the actual work that needs to happen if we want the future to go well, is very, very boring. It is not epic, exciting. We need to, crusade on social media, or we need to solve this cool math problem or build this big machine. Like, all these stuff are like nice and fun and seductive, but they're mostly not what we need to do. Most of reality is very boring. Most of power is very boring. One of the most, maybe the most powerful entity in the world, the US government, is mostly extremely boring. It's just unbelievably boring. It's bureaucracy and petty politics and writing things down and having long meetings and et cetera, right? And now when people see this, they might assume, well, there is some exciting part that I'm not seeing, or that I see on TV, or TV tries to present these things as like exciting and memeable or whatever. Or you might think it's like defective. Like if it was non-defective, it wouldn't be this way. But the truth is that most complex things are made of simple parts. Most big actions are made of simple things. Most of coding is not coming up with some brilliant new algorithm that will be named after you and you're going to win an award for. Most of it is trying to fucking connect to the stupid web server, and copying code from Stack Overflow, right? Like 99% of your coding work is going to be rehashing things that people much smarter than you have already solved better in the past. It's just how it is, right? The reason I'm harping on this so strongly is to see this as aesthetic, is that there's a lot of boring work that needs to happen. When I talk to policymakers, to the general public, including to extremely powerful people, like even like billionaires and stuff like this, it is utterly shocking how many of them have just never heard the arguments. Literally, no one told them. It's not that they like heard the arguments, thought about them carefully, and rejected them. That happens sometimes. But most of the time, literally just no one sat them down and just politely and patiently explained things to them. Like I've had meetings with like high level politicians. Well, I'll sit down, take an hour or something, and they'll ask me a bunch of questions about AI or whatever, and I'll answer all the questions. I remember this like particularly like one politician I talked to this where like at the end of the meeting, he was just kind of like when I answered, he asked me like some complicated question, and I answered the question, and he looked at me and he was kind of like, "Wow, you're really answering my questions." Like he was shocked that like because that I was not trying to sell him something, I was not trying to make him do anything. I was just taking the time to explain things to him, and he was so thankful for this. He was so genuinely thankful for this that just like someone took the time out of their day to just give him information to help him. This is how not everyone, like to be clear, there are corrupt politicians, evil people, blah, blah, blah. But like most people in most institutions, in most bureaucracies are just normal people. They're just trying to get by. They're overworked. They're overstressed. They don't know what to do. There's all these things pulling them in different directions. And we need a lot of patience, a lot of work of just explaining things very carefully over and over to different people to, helping them do the things that they need to do and so on. So what do we do? The kind of things that I and you and all of us need to do is we need to just have patience and actually explain things to people. We need to actually reach out to politicians and be like, hey, what are you doing about this problem? I'm very concerned. Here's this compendium thing, you can read about it. Or I'd be happy to come over and tell you more about this. Or here's my friend who works at an AI startup who'd be happy to explain this to you. I know a guy who has been just emailed like all of his local senators and House members and whatever. Just every day he just emails them a summary of like every week he emails them a summary, like cold email, just emails them a summary of what's happened in AI this week. And he's gotten like 3 meetings out of this because they were like genuinely thankful. They're like, "Oh, thanks for sending this. Like, hey, can I ask you a question about this?" That's great. Like, this is awesome. If we could get 2 people in every US state to do this, to just like send your politicians a very polite, helpful email of like, hey, here's what's going on. I'm concerned about this, But like, I thought you might want to know this. Like, it sounds like nothing, right? Like, it seems so small. But these are the kinds of small things that large coordination, that large institutions are built of. These are the kinds of small actions. And I need people to do stuff like this. I need people to help do stuff like this. Read the compendium, talk to policymakers, talk to your friends, talk about this on social media, because this is a civilizational problem. This is not a problem you or me can solve. This is a problem that we have to solve as a group, as a species, as a civilization. And the way we do that is we need to talk. Gus, you were saying earlier that like your ancestors wouldn't consider your job to be a real job. I disagree. I think they would have understood. If I told them, oh, you're a messenger or you're a diplomat, they would have been like, oh, of course. Yeah, of course. That's very important. The kingdoms must know the information. That's great of him that he's doing that. I'm glad he's extracting all the information and bringing it to all the people. What a great job. Like our ancestors would have actually understood the concept of a podcast. They wouldn't understand, microphones, the internet, per se. But like the idea of someone who like finds interesting people who know interesting things, extracts their information and brings it to people. That's labor. Like that's like obviously labor, Like maybe the information is not useful, maybe it's just amusing or whatever, but that's labor. Moving information around civilization, around society is work. The same way as moving earth or moving, materials is labor. Moving information around the graph is labor. And this is the labor that needs to happen. This is a very, very important thing. Yeah, I think this is very important, is that we need to move this information. It needs to be replicated. It needs to be spoken. It needs to be talked about. Because then people can reason about it. Like, if something is uncool and weird, you can't think about it. You can't talk about it. It's like, if you're a politician and you keep talking about something weird, you lose your job. If something is not weird, if it's an important issue that everyone keeps emailing you about, then you can talk about it. Then you're allowed to think about it. There's another thing you said earlier, which was how more information allows you to know more things. Like you could know the Bitcoin price, right? This is true. But will you decide to know the Bitcoin price? The scarce resource of right now is not information, it's attention. You could know many things. You could know so many things. Will you? You could read every book in history. Will you? No, you can't. You have a limited budget of attention of what you can know. So the difficulty is no longer there are a few things to know. The problem is now you must choose what to know. You must choose what to think about, what to process in your mind, what to put into your brain and actually think about. And politicians and all other people who are busy have this huge problem where there's so much that is vying for their attention. So a lot of what you have to do as a citizen is help these nodes, these connector nodes, your politicians and your influencers and, even just your local friend group. You have to help them draw their attention to the thing they need to pay attention to. You need to help them do this. This is a process. And then once they can reason about this, once it's more normal, they can spend more attention. They can form better opinions. They can ask better questions. They can find other people to work with. They can to ask questions to and to build coalitions. This is the kind of stuff that we need to do. We need large coalitions of people across the spectrum, not just tech people. I assume a lot of tech people listen to this podcast, but if you're a non-tech person, you're the kind of person I want helping with this. Whether people from civil society, people from NGO backgrounds, or unions, or just day-to-day normal people interested in this topic, whether it's academics or it's faith groups. All of this, this affects everybody. AGI, AI is a thing that affects everybody. It affects your job. It affects your family. It affects your church. It affects everything. You should think about this. I am trying to make the case to you that you should give this a little bit of your attention. Your attention is extremely valuable. You have your family to attend to. You have your life to attend to. There are many things that are valuable to you to attend to. I'm making the case, please attend to this as well. Put a little bit of your attention on this. Not a lot. I think it's important. Don't put your whole life on this. Put 10%, 5% of your attention, 1% of it, a couple hours a week, 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week of your attention thinking about this. What do you think about this? How does it make you feel? Who do you trust here or not? What questions do you have? How do you get these questions answered? The thing that I really recommend to people is literally open a Google Doc and start writing. What is my plan? What do I think about AI? What are my questions? Where am I uncertain? How do I get to the thing I want to? And who should I ask? Who should I work with? This sounds stupid. I'm sorry, it sounds so stupid.
It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds like a valuable advice, I think. Maybe it doesn't sound prestigious, but it doesn't sound stupid to me. And I think that's an important difference that you made. You kind of sketched out yourself.
I think you're right about this. If it works, it ain't stupid. And this works. This works. If you, dear listener, actually want to have a causal effect on the future going well, no joke, you actually want to have a causal effect. The thing I think you should do is you go to your computer, you open an empty Google Doc, start a bullet point, and you start writing out, what do you want the future to be? What do you want it to look like? And you start asking, well, what do I need to do to get there? What's currently broken? Or what do I need to do? And then you start to notice, what questions do you have? Where are you uncertain? What are resources that you currently don't have access to? Who do you need to reach out to? Or what actions can you take? And don't break yourself over this. Put an hour of work into it. Don't do more. Maybe once a week, have a call with someone, send me or someone else an email and just ask some questions. A lot of people are nice, including a lot of famous people are very nice. You can just ask them questions, go on social media, ask questions, try to figure it out, find other people in your area who might be interested in this thing. This is civics. This is the job of a civilian, to build a greater civilization. Civilians. Our job is to build a greater civilization for ourselves and for everyone else. And this is how we do it. This is the process of how we do it. And so I just ask anyone listening to this, join me, do the small things.
I think that's valuable advice. Connor, thanks for chatting with me. It's been great.
Thanks. It's been a real pleasure.